The Allen Line Company thanks all the hard-working drivers who are moving goods across the country. We can't do it without you.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
There's been some chatter out there about the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's plans to address the broker transparency issue. The plans are still on, despite some speculation to the contrary. Mark Schremmer and Ryan Witkowski of Landline Magazine will walk us through the latest in the battle against broker fraud and look ahead to what's next. It would seem on the surface that mixing bicycles and large trucks is not a good idea. However, that is what's happening in Oregon, where designated lanes put bicycles onto roads that are also designated truck routes. And from the trucker's perspective especially, that's creating some problems. Now, some in the industry in that state are proposing solutions to those problems. To find out what's going on and what's proposed, I'll talk with Mark Gibson, the Government Relations Policy Advisor with the Oregon Trucking Association. And finally, when it comes to Washington, D.C., there's no question that money talks. But Louis Pugh, the Executive Vice President of OOIDA, argues that the people still have the power, but they have to harness it to make change come about. He'll tell us the best and easiest way to do that. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Our top story today. There was a modest increase in trucking jobs last month, but current conditions in the industry may point to future job losses. According to the latest numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, more than 2,000 trucking jobs were added to the economy in January. David Spencer, Vice President of Market Intelligence at Arrive Logistics, told Landline he expects further employment declines, pending a change in the overall demand environment. For all of 2023, trucking jobs went down by nearly 34,000. Across all industries, 353,000 jobs were added to the economy in January. The unemployment rate was unchanged at 3.7%. New details tonight about that CDL bribery scandal in Massachusetts we've been telling you about. The Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles has revoked the CDLs of 26 people who were granted a CDL without passing the skills test. In a statement to Boston 25 News, the RMV said the 26 individuals are no longer allowed to operate a commercial motor vehicle, and their licenses have been downgraded to a Class D passenger license. They are also unable to obtain a commercial driver's license in the future without first confirming eligibility and taking and passing all required commercial permit and skills tests. The RMV said it's not aware of any crashes involving any of these 26 people involving a commercial motor vehicle. State officials added they're still working to find out if any other people were given CDLs who didn't earn it. Earlier this week, the acting U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts announced that 6 people, including 4 state troopers, had been arrested and charged in a years-long scheme that involved giving out CDLs to people who didn't pass a skills test in exchange for cash and gifts. Louisiana is moving forward with plans to build a new Interstate 10 bridge, and tolls are a big part of it, with heavy trucks incurring the biggest cost. The Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development announced this week that a public-private partnership will be used to build the new I-10 Calcasieu River Bridge in Lake Charles to replace the current 1.25-mile-long bridge. The total projected cost of the project is $2.1 billion. The high price tag means they'll need to pay for it somehow. About half of the bill will be paid through state and federal funding sources. The rest will come from tolling, and commercial trucks will bear a lot of that burden. The plan calls for tolls of $8.25 on large trucks with a toll tag and $12.36 for large trucks without a toll tag. Passenger vehicles will only have to pay a quarter to cross the bridge. Police in Fort Myers, Florida, are asking for help following the death of a truck driver. Aubrey Carter's body was found in a vacant field last week. Fort Myers police are treating this as a homicide. Surveillance footage captured a semi being driven from the scene, and it still hasn't been found. The truck said Henderson Trucking pried through performance on the side, with the number 53 displayed on the upper right corner of the box trailer. They want to talk to whoever was behind the wheel following Carter's death. An update now to a story we brought you last spring involving defeat devices. At the time, we told you about 3 Michigan companies and 12 individuals who were charged in connection to a multi-year scheme to disable emission controls on semis. The U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan at the time called the case one of the largest of its kind ever in the United States. An 8th person now has been sentenced for his role in the scheme. Dustin Ryan will serve 12 months of probation and pay $2,000 in fines. Ryan previously pleaded guilty to a count of conspiracy to violate the Clean Air Act. The defendants in the case all work for one of three companies, Diesel Freak, Accurate Truck Service, or Griffin Transportation. Prosecutors say they worked in unison to remove or change the hardware components in heavy-duty diesel engines that controlled emissions. Roadrunner is expanding its less-than-truckload service throughout North America. Portland, Oregon has been added to the company's service route along with Toronto and Montreal via Detroit. Roadrunner said in a news release they've also added 135 new lanes to its network. The company is calling itself transportation's greatest comeback story after running into multiple financial and legal problems in recent years. Roadrunner started expanding its network last year for the first time in years. The Michigan DOT is asking for feedback on the idea of a road use tax. The survey is in response to funding concerns as more people transition to electric vehicles and more fuel-efficient cars. That means less money generated from Michigan's fuel tax of around 30 cents a gallon, which means less money for road repairs. A Michigan DOT survey is asking whether drivers would rather pay taxes on each mile they drive in place of the state's current gas tax. A spokesperson for the state DOT told WILX-10 this isn't about setting policy, it's just to get feedback. MDOT hopes to gather 20,000 responses to the survey by March 1st. After that, drivers will be picked at random to answer questions about what they would be willing to pay and how it might change the way they travel. A trucking company owner interviewed by WILX-10 said being taxed by the mile would be devastating for his business. He said his 27 drivers travel up to 400 miles a day, and a pay-by-the-mile tax would simply be way too costly. It may not feel like it outside, but the state of Michigan is ushering in spring. The state DOT and local agencies starting up annual spring weight restrictions as of Friday. The restrictions enforced on all state trunk line highways throughout Michigan. The annual rule goes into effect when frozen roads begin to thaw, when the roadbed softens, leaving pavement more susceptible to damage. Rules vary. On routes designated as seasonal, weight reductions will be posted. Tennessee and Arkansas drivers, listen up. You'll need to plan ahead if your route includes Interstate 55 through Memphis. The Tennessee DOT plans to shut down the I-55 bridge between West Memphis, Arkansas and Memphis, Tennessee, starting early Saturday morning. Crews will be out doing repair work and construction throughout the weekend. The closure is set to remain in effect through Monday morning. Detours will be posted. And finally, Love's has opened up its first new store of 2024. It's in southwestern Colorado off Highway 160 in Cortez. The site includes 29 truck parking spaces. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Do you have a news tip? Maybe you have a comment about something you heard on the air, or maybe you just have a question about something happening in the trucking industry. Email us at landlinenow@ooida.com. Again, that email address is landlinenow@ooida.com. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the Wheeler Ridge Petro Truck Stop in Lebec, California. That's located at exit 219 on Interstate 5. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. OOIDA is seeking the names and addresses of military personnel serving overseas so we can send them care packages through Truckers for Troops. Call that information in to Nikki Johnson at our main number, 816-229-5791, or email it to troops@ooida.com. Next, Mark Schremmer and Ryan Witkowski of Landline Magazine walk us through the latest in the battle against broker fraud, and I'll talk with Mark Gibson, Government Relations Policy Advisor with the Oregon Trucking Association. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman, your leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Let us help you avoid costly downtime and repairs by visiting capitalreman.com today. Use code OOIDA10 to receive your member benefits.
Stock up on Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's most trusted anti-gel. And to be safe from the harshest winter conditions, make sure you have Howe's Diesel Lifeline on hand, the fastest-acting gelling rescue product. Available nationwide, Howe's products are designed to keep you rolling through the toughest conditions. Visit howesproducts.com.
Attention professional drivers, are you behind on your tax filings? You owe money? Integrity Tax Relief Group frees drivers from IRS trouble. You watch the road, we'll keep an eye on the IRS. Call now. 855-976-4291.
Buckling up keeps everyone safe on the roads. Learn more at www.sharetheroadsafely.gov. Paid for by FMCSA.
Landline Now, welcome back. We're going to shine the spotlight once again on all the problems currently plaguing the trucking industry when it comes to broker fraud, broker abuse, broker transparency. The list goes on here. We've got some new developments, and joining us to run through them are Mark Schremmer and Ryan Witkowski of Landline Magazine. Ryan, Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you as always.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Scott.
Welcome back. So the new wrinkle here to all of this came this past week when the U.S. DOT released its significant rulemakings report. There was nary a word about brokers in it, which led, I'm not going to call anybody out here, but it did lead one trucking publication to ask somewhat rhetorically whether FMCSA was basically giving up its efforts to tackle this problem. You reached out, Mark, you got an answer, and it's pretty clear cut as to what's going on here.
Yeah, and it's pretty, what we figured that the answer would be, that if you noted in the previous report, if it looked at it, FMCSA specifically mentioned that the only reason that it was included in the previous significant rulemakings report was because a change to the deadline that they wanted to make sure everybody was aware of. But at the same time, that basically noting that it would not be on future reports because it was not actually hitting the threshold to be called economically significant. So it's a technicality that it's not on the report, but it wasn't, we didn't need to, go Chicken Little with it, and that's kind of what happened. And obviously, this rule and this issue is such a big deal to so many truckers, and so many truckers are feeling the effects right now of low freight rates, feeling the issues, feeling like that they're being taken advantage of by a lot of unscrupulous brokers out there. So I can totally understand why so many, were kind of up in arms and concerned that this is hopefully a win. That last year FMCSA granted this petition for rulemaking to actually address this issue. I can understand the concerns that it was going away, but what we're looking at is still an October release of a proposal.
Well, and we've had conversations before about some of that, pregnant pace at which the federal government moves at. And, we were there, I think you were there too last year at Matt, Scott, when they had the FMCSA listening session. And a lot of what was going on at the Mid-America Trucking Show last year was geared towards brokers and talking about how to have relationships with brokers and how to, maybe clear some of these hurdles that have been persistent issues in the industry. And, they opened up the floor and it got, I wouldn't say out of hand, but it got passionate quickly amongst that session. And here we are, preparing to go to Louisville again in March. And I don't feel like there's been a lot of steps forward. There's been a lot of things that kind of clouded the water and made it a little more unclear about what direction they were headed in. But it definitely seemed like there was a lot of, I don't want to say maybe cautious optimism at Matt's last year. I feel like heading into this year, it's done a 180.
Yeah, there was probably an hour and a half worth of commenters at that listening session of drivers, and it could have gone on an hour and a half longer, or two. As long as they would have allowed that session, there would have been more drivers in line ready to give their 2 cents on that. And it's one of those things, like you said. So that month, it was March of 2023, that they had announced that they had granted OIDA's petition to address broker transparency and do a rulemaking. And so that was the same month, and everybody was really excited about it. And then later it was said that I think that they were going to come out with the proposal in June or July, I think it was. And then a month or two after that, they said, sorry about that. It's going to be October 2024.
Not a sense of urgency.
No,
there.
it's definitely so. I can understand, why people feared. Oh no! First we heard a delay, now we're here, and it's not gonna come. But
we did get a chance to make it to the Louisville Slugger Museum, so last March wasn't an entire wash. But
you got one of those free bats, didn't you?
Well, I did.
Those little free mini bats.
I got to hold a Babe Ruth bat in my hand. So
I declined that option. I knew I'd swing it.
Well, yeah, there are quite a few folks who'd like to take a bat. Yeah, exactly. I'd like to take a bat to broker fraud as I try to make a smooth segue there. You talk about the frustrations because they are, and so understandable, because this is an issue that continues to seemingly get worse and worse. The most frustrating thing about this in terms of transparency is, and we've underlined this point before, and let's do that again and put it in bold and in italics and increase the font size.
Highlighters, yeah.
There are other already rules on the books right now regarding broker transparency. And I think a lot of people out there may not realize it, or maybe they just think it's not even worth going down that road. I want to make sure we emphasize that here, because that is the frustration with FMCSA as well, that the rules are on the books, they're not being enforced, and drivers out there, what do you do when that situation arises? That's something that's got to be addressed here.
Well, I know one of the biggest concerns, and I just wrote a piece about this coming out in our March issue, is about broker carrier agreements and how a lot of those things that are on the books to kind of safeguard carriers and make sure that they're getting a fair deal in the whole transaction process. Those broker carrier agreements, they have provisions built into them to essentially negate and mitigate all of those things that are built to help the carrier. And so, talking to Paul, our legal counsel, and then listening to some of the things that he has to say about it, he reads a ton of these agreements. They show up in almost every single one of them. We're talking about things where you're waiving your rights to documentation, where you're basically agreeing that they can offset costs on those contracts. So that way, if there's a damaged claim or missing cargo or whatever the case may be, they can offset that cost onto the carrier, and you have no real say in what goes on in that. And so some of these provisions that are being built in there, Paul calls them landmines. They're built right into those contracts, and they circumvent anything that really is already on the books.
And when you sign it,
and once you've signed it, that's gospel.
Yeah.
No, one thing of this is I think a big part of it, of why these regulations have been ignored for so long, is kind of the general assumption that this isn't what FMCSA is about. It's not about safety. It's not all of these things. But if you really look at, I give credit to the agency. They are starting to understand more of the connection between these issues and safety. When you look at, how many maybe safe drivers out there, carriers, go out of business because of getting involved in these type of issues. If you lose safe drivers from the road, you also think about if there are motor carriers out there that are losing money on bad deals like this, maybe they decide, I'm going to go ahead and forego the maintenance this month that I need to have on my truck. All of those type of things, because they're just trying to survive, in business. To get by. There are definite connections to all of these things. And I know that brokers will tell you, we had a House hearing not too long ago, and it had a broker representative that was talking about the issues of fraud in the industry and how FMCSA needed to do more, but then at the same time is then later saying, FMCSA shouldn't get involved with this transparency thing because it has nothing to do with safety and they should stay in their lane. So kind of, speaking out of both sides of the mouth there. But no, I think that is the key, is looking at, these regulations are on the book for a long time because there is a safety connection to these. Not every safety element is specifically about, everything on the truck or trying to add a new technology to do this or do that, or a new bell and whistle. There are other things that go into safety.
Well, and I think for those that are also belly aching about, FMCSA getting involved in this, you and I have had this conversation several times. Like, that's who you go to. That there is no other avenue for you to lodge this complaint. And so while some of these mega carriers and these big fleets will sit there and the brokerage firms as well will say you shouldn't be getting involved, I guess my question to them was, who would you like me to have get involved? Because this is the
the answer is they would like no one to get involved.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, to give again FMCSA more credit on this, because credit where credit is due.
Sure.
They are looking at this issue. They have said it's a priority. The wheels of government do move slowly here, but we do have a final rule, right, recently published. That deals with financial security a little bit, Mark. So we are seeing little steps here and there.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway there from like OOIDA's perspective would be great. It's a step forward or a half a step forward, but they've actually petitioned the agency to basically start over. Not that this doesn't mark a step forward, but at the same time, there's so much more that OOIDA believes needs to be done that they really should scratch this rule and start over. There just needs to be more things out there and protections for truckers to make sure that there's a level playing field, and there just isn't right now.
Which gets back to your point that you mentioned earlier, Ryan, with these contracts that we've talked about this before. I wouldn't be able to make heads or tails of it. And most people can't either when they get it. You get people signing on the dotted line, and as you said, it becomes the gospel when all these things are written in the language there. In this case, not getting in that situation in the first place really is your best defense when we're talking about broker abuse.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems easier said than done for a lot. And I think, too, dealing with brokers is almost a necessary evil of the industry, right? Like, OOIDA, I know will always tell you we'd try to work with direct shippers and try to do things
in a perfect world.
In a perfect world in utopia, yeah, sure, that might work. But unfortunately, you have to operate in the real world, and in the real world, this is how a lot of the business gets done. And so, being proactive, staying in front of those things, reading over that carrier agreement, that broker carrier agreement, having an attorney read over it, or even have OOIDA read over it. Their business services department will be happy to take a look at that and make sure that you're not going to get screwed in that deal. And listening to Paul, some of the things that he really talked about doing your homework is just getting in front of those and knowing what those landmines are. In the real world, you're likely not going to be able to negotiate those out. Most brokers are going to tell you to kick rocks if you ask them to try to negotiate those terms. So knowing what they are and knowing how to operate while still having those in there, look, if you're not going to be able to negotiate it out, at least be aware that it's there and cover your ass, really. I mean, that's the way that you need to kind of look at it. Demand documentation. Take as many photos of loads if you can. If you pick someone up and it's damaged, make sure you get documentation on that. And just do your homework when it comes to dealing with the brokers. You can look at their Safer website. You can check out their surety bond. You can go on and do a credit check of the broker. Like, there's all sorts of ways for you to figure out if you're doing business with a reputable person in the first place. And if they're not checking those boxes, don't sign the contract.
I imagine the too good to be true rule would apply here.
Oh, 100%. And, if you're looking for more information as well, I know the OOIDA Foundation put together a whole YouTube series of videos about brokers, broker fraud, doing your due diligence, double brokering, phishing and smishing scams, which I swear is an actual word. It's
a fun word.
It really is.
Not a fun thing, but a fun word.
Well, phishing, I enjoy.
Oh, okay. I meant smishing, but yes.
I look it up, and I swear to God it's a word. But, we've gone to great lengths at OOIDA to make sure that you can have the information at your disposal to make the best informed decisions you can. Because, again, I'll say this, you're operating in the real world. You eventually are going to have to deal with a broker. You should at least be smart when you're doing it.
Quick plug with the contracts before signing one. You can call OOIDA 816-229-5791. They will look at it for you. They will tell you, hey, there's a red flag here. Don't do this. And also online, OOIDA.com. For members, there is a form now for in the name of broker transparency. If you want documents, which you are entitled to, you can kind of plug and play and send that in and get that information. Ryan, Mark, we have to leave it there. I'm sure we'll talk about this again at some point, but we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
We've got a short break coming right up, but stick around. There's more Landline Now right after this.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to Prepass.com.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
It would seem on the surface that mixing bicycles and large trucks is not a good idea. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Reddig. Welcome back to the program. However, that is what is happening in Oregon, where designated lanes put bicycles onto roads that are also designated truck routes. And from the trucker's perspective especially, that's creating some problems. Now, some in the industry in that state are proposing solutions to those problems. To find out what's going on and what's proposed, I called Mark Gibson, the Government Relations Policy Advisor with the Oregon Trucking Association. This involves an effort in Oregon to create bike lanes and so-called buffer zones that go with those. Would you walk us through in some detail what they're doing and why they're doing it?
Yeah, and let me clear that up a little bit. There currently are bike lanes in the state of Oregon, and oftentimes transportation planners, let me back up a little bit. When there are changes to transportation plans, primarily in an urban environment in cities, oftentimes there'll be 2 lanes in each direction. So what we're seeing a lot of recently is they'll reduce those 2 lanes in each direction to 1 lane in each direction. They'll add bike lanes, and they'll add what's considered a buffer between the bike lane and the travel lane. That buffer generally is around 3 feet, although it can vary. Generally, a bike lane will be about a 5-foot bike lane. Again, that can vary as well. And the issue that we're running into in the trucking industry is that travel lane traditionally is going from a 12-foot lane down to an 11-foot lane. So the law already allows for the bike lane and the use of the buffer lane and the 11-foot travel lane. What we're asking for is simply, if the planners want to reduce the travel lane from a 12-foot lane to 11-foot lane, if you take a standard truck, which is 8.5 feet wide, when you add the mirrors to that truck, typically 10.5 feet is a reasonable number. If you take a downtown city bus, typically that bus is 8.5 feet wide. You add mirrors, you have 10.5 feet. So what we're asking for is, okay, if we're gonna take this lane reduction from 12 to 11 feet, let us utilize that buffer only in a situation where it's needed. When you're passing maybe another truck, a motorhome, a city bus, whatever it might need, let us, and I'm not talking just trucks, we're talking trucks or cars, utilize that buffer lane in the sense that it would allow us to cross that solid line. Currently, Oregon revised statutes don't allow us to cross that solid line. So we're not asking to change anything in terms of bike lanes or even buffers. We're just asking that the statute be modified to allow us to use that buffer lane if needed. And this is something that we've worked on with the Oregon State Police. They've weighed in on it because police agencies, when they are trying to make a traffic stop, a lot of times one of the things they will use is if a vehicle is crossing over that line. So we've worked with them to ensure that there are safeguards to not limit their ability to make those traffic stops. So again, bottom line is, all we're really looking for is the ability to utilize that buffer lane, or not, it's not even really a lane, to utilize that buffer space if needed.
And just to clarify, that 11-foot width is a problem because it just leaves you, as I recall, 3 inches on each side of these large vehicles as far as leeway.
Absolutely right. And that is really the big issue. If you take the National Association of Cities Design Guide, for example, they've got design standards for a standard bus, mid-sized car, parked cars, box trucks. They have standards that they have issued basically just for rule of thumbs when cities design downtown streets. And their design guide spells out a standard city bus, 8.5 feet wide with 10.5-foot mirrors. And they go on to say that in that situation, ideally you should have an 11.5-foot space to operate in. Now, I don't want to imply that they say you should have an 11-foot lane. They're saying, okay, you can deal with an 11-foot lane in areas where congestion is minimal, when typically you don't have trucks and buses passing each other. But ideally, even they're saying you really need about 11.5 feet to maneuver that vehicle in terms of mirror clearance, et cetera.
Let me ask kind of a devil's advocate question here. Why not simply go back to 12-foot lanes? I mean, does the buffer zone need to be as large as they're making it?
Well, absolutely right. We would like nothing more than to see 12-foot lanes. The theory behind 12-foot lanes from the planning side is 12-foot lanes reduced to 11 feet creates what they call a traffic calming scenario. The theory is if you have a narrower lane, the normal driver visually is going to say, okay, I've got a narrower lane, I need to slow down. So that's one of the big theories behind the 11-foot lane. But the other side of that really is, in Oregon, I'll use the example because that's really what I'm most familiar with. The majority of the roads that we are talking about here are designated freight routes. Oregon has a system of designated freight routes. And back when these freight routes were designated, a lot of these cities were more rural, there was less congestion, so it wasn't the issue that it is now. So now they're saying, okay, with the implementation of active transportation, which basically brings bikes and peds into the transportation system, we need more facilities. That means, okay, we want to put bike lanes in. Now, if we're going to put a bike lane in, we as an industry, if that's going to happen, I think we would prefer there to be a buffer. But we have argued exactly what you just said. Let's just reduce the size of the buffer and maintain our 12-foot travel lane. But that doesn't seem to be the norm in design theory anymore. So,
have you talked with some of the truck drivers, the people actually driving these rigs who are encountering this problem?
Oh, yeah. We absolutely have. And in addition to my position with Oregon Trucking Association, I also own a trucking company. So I know firsthand, I have a CDL. I drove truck for many years back in the day. So I understand what it's all about. And the majority of, we've talked with a lot of our members and a lot of our drivers, and obviously they have concerns, and anybody who's ever been in that position has those concerns. What we've tried to do at some of our safety events is actually set up a truck with cones at 11 feet and have people get inside the cab and look around and realize, wow, you don't have a lot of space. And in a truck, a standard Class 8 truck, it's really hard to see where that next lane is. So we've definitely talked to truck drivers, and I think the overwhelming majority, if not all the drivers I've talked to, are in support of maintaining a 12-foot lane. Absolutely.
Let me ask another kind of devil's advocate question here. We are talking about, as you mentioned earlier, bike lanes on designated truck routes. And it seems to me that that's a very odd combination of transportation modes in one space. Why are there even bike lanes on routes designated for trucks?
Well, that's a really good question. And that is a point that we have argued. But basically what what that side of I'll call it an argument. I don't know that it's an argument, but that side of the discussion says is these roads have been here for a very long time, and a lot of the bike routes through the middle of town are being proposed by the cities that we travel through. And so there's a big change, and well, I don't know that it's a big change, but cities are trying to undergo beautification projects, safety projects. A lot of this is around safety, and in many situations, adding a bike lane does make it safer because you do have bikes traveling on a city street. However, what we would like to see as an industry really are either grade separated bike lanes where that bike lane is separated completely by maybe a curb or some other delineation, or ideally have a bike lane that doesn't even travel on that main road, as you just talked about. So that's what we would love to see ideally, but obviously money and space are two big issues.
Part of this whole issue involves a concept I was reading about called a road diet. And I think that's important for just understanding how Oregon is going about this. Can you explain what that term means in the context of Oregon?
Sure. What a road diet is when you've got 2 lanes in each direction of travel. And what a road diet is they'll take those. It's really what we've been talking about this whole time. They'll take those 2 travel lanes in each direction. They'll reduce each travel lane to 1 travel lane. So now you've got 1 travel lane in each direction. And then they'll add a bike lane and sometimes a buffer if there's enough space. And the theory is that slows traffic down. You'll reduce the speed limit. And the theory is that it's done in terms of safety.
Okay. Now, I understand that you've suggested some changes to state law. I'm wondering if you can briefly explain what changes you're looking for, and has your proposal drawn any opposition?
The changes that we're looking for is really just so simple as to define what a buffer space is, which is that space between a bike lane and a travel lane. Define what that is, and then put verbiage in the statute that basically allows a vehicle, not just a truck, but a vehicle to utilize a portion of that buffer lane if needed, but only in very specific circumstances to avoid another vehicle or, the obvious things. And I can't say there's been opposition. There's been questions as to why we need to do that. And then there's been some misinformation that really what we as an industry are trying to do is limit our liability for accidents with bicycles. But this really has nothing to do with bicycles. We're in those situations where we already have the buffer, we're only asking to utilize a portion of that buffer really to reduce our potential for accidents with vehicular traffic, say meeting another truck coming the other way, or maybe a motorhome. A number of these freight routes go through cities that depend on tourism in the summertime. You'll get a lot of motorhome traffic, et cetera. So that's really what we're trying to do, is mitigate our potential for collisions with other traffic. And I do want to go on to say that a lot of this is based on safety, and a reduction of speed obviously can reduce the severity of accidents, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to reduce the number of accidents in terms of collisions with truck mirrors or other vehicles, or they may be relatively minor, but as we in the trucking industry know, if a truck's involved in an accident, somebody's going to go after that truck. So that's where we're coming from.
Okay. Well, Mark, that's all I have. Thank you very much for all your time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time as well, Mark.
That was Mark Gibson, the Government Relations Policy Advisor with the Oregon Trucking Association, talking about a situation involving bike lanes on truck routes in Oregon. We'll be right back. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a cat scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget misaccuracy when you're truck on a cat scale.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. Time now to get up on our soapboxes for a moment and preach to you about the importance of annoying your members of Congress. We'll explain what I mean by that here in a moment with the help of Louis Pugh, the Executive Vice President of OOIDA, who joins us in Studio A. Louis, good to see you.
Hey, it's good to see you as well, my friend.
So we should explain what prompted this topic, and this is an opinion piece you actually wrote, I think, for the March issue of Landline magazine, and in it you point out that while money certainly does talk in Washington, D.C., and we know that it really does talk, the people do still have the power out there. You're calling it grassroots power. What prompted you to write this?
Jamie Jones told me to.
And what she says goes.
Yeah, she made me do it.
All right, well, there you go.
There you go.
It's going to be a short conversation, Louis.
No, seriously, though, because I think we talk about this a lot. And we talk about reaching out to members of Congress and how important it is to have a relationship with your political representatives, and we say a lot, but we probably don't say enough of why, I guess, maybe is, it's just like, hey, call your congressman, go to Fighting for Truckers, but why? And that's part of the reason. And also, I guess after the hearing that we saw there, I think it was in December,
Yep.
And Congressman Nels and Burleson and Collins and Bost and some of the other congressmen who understand trucking or at least listen to truckers and to OOIDA and stuff, they really spoke up and they really got on FMCSA and the administrator, and they didn't really hold any punches. And the reason they did that, and they didn't hold those punches, was because the simple fact was, from one, our tireless efforts on the Hill, but mainly from the tireless efforts of our members picking up that telephone and calling them and letting them know how important these issues are. For anyone who watched that, and if you go to a lot of social pages and YouTube, you can find clips of that. But for anyone who watched that, there was one point where Nels, Representative Nels from Texas, good friend of truckers, held up a copy of Landline magazine. Now, I'm sure everybody listening to this knows who Landline magazine is.
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. But when you look at that, you'll notice that magazine has tabs stuck to it, a whole bunch of tabs. That's from a member who sends him one every single month, goes through it, tabs at the things that he needs to read, and sends it to Nels. And apparently Nels reads it.
Yeah. And not saying you have to do that necessarily. You don't have to go through an arts and crafts project or anything like that. But I mean, we're talking phone calls. And, I know just from my experience, the idea of calling up your member of Congress or shooting off an email or what have you, people are busy. They got stuff going on. They're working hard. When they're not working hard, they're spending time with family, with friends, doing whatever they may want to do. I think the question you ask is why, because it does make a difference. I mean, it could be a short conversation over the phone. It could be fightingfortruckers.com, using that form there to reach out. But it's important to do it, and it doesn't take that long. What kind of feedback do you get from people when you ask members to do this? Do you get some pushback from them?
Yeah, the biggest thing I get, and I talk to members of truck shows and all the time here on The Office and all the time, and it's great. But the biggest pushback I always hear is, well, that's what you guys are for. I'm not good at talking to people. I don't know how to talk to a lawmaker. I don't know these bills. I don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. They love what we do, but they're like, I don't know. And I say, you're the expert. You're always the expert. There's nobody on Capitol Hill other than very few, which is Congressman Boss, probably first, and Collins, who have a trucking background. There's a couple other have a little bit of trucking background, but really no trucking. And the rest of them only know what they're taught. I mean, it's just like me. I don't know about being a radio disc jockey like you. So you have to tell me how to do these kind of things that we're doing right now.
Yeah, sure.
Because I don't know, and that's the way it works. So, and I remind people that there's lots of people on Capitol Hill telling lawmakers things that aren't true about trucking or that aren't going to make trucking better for you and for others out there. So that's why you need to educate them, and nobody better to educate them, because all these people who are telling them that this won't work, they never drove a truck. They never sat behind a wheel.
They got their own interests in mind.
They got their own interests, their own agenda, their own money, and the last thing they are going to do is lobby for something that's going to help you. The thing is, never can they say about whatever they're lobbying for is, when I drove truck, I know if you'd have done this, it would have been so much better. They don't have that real world experience. And that's where truckers, that's where you do have. And that's what you say. You don't have to know the bill per se or know the right words. Just be professional, be yourself, and say, hey, I'm a trucker and I'm going down the road, and if you put a speed limiter on my truck, you're putting me in harm's way, because first and foremost, I can't get away from something if I need to, or I'm going to have all these people continue to cut me off, or they already don't like me, and whatever you have to say. Be yourself, be professional, and say it. And look at me. I go to Capitol Hill. I'm going there in a couple days. Going to be there for almost a week. Probably 20-some meetings on Capitol Hill. I'm talking to lawmakers. I'm still a trucker. I don't know how to talk fancy or professionally or any of that kind of stuff. I give real-world advice. I give real-world statements. I say, this is what my members are telling me. This is what our board is telling me. Or this is what I've experienced. And that's it. And you know what I've found? Most lawmakers, they actually like that. They like that there's a person with real world experience telling them the truth. Our lobbyists here at OIDO are professional lobbyists. That's all they've ever. They'll tell you lawmakers like it because they get tired of hearing from lobbyists who are in there pushing their agenda. It's like NASCAR, they all got all these, they're all in their little sponsors trying to get their little thing. It's nice to have a real person come in there. I still remember meeting with a lawmaker, and I'm there with one of our lobbyists, me and we're talking, me and this lawmaker. We have a really nice talk. And before I get ready to leave, he gets up and he shakes my hand, and he shakes our lobbyist's hand, and he said, Mr. Pugh, I really appreciate you stopping by. He goes, please stop by more. He says, what we need is more real people in here. That's what we need. We need to hear from more real people. Now, I guess my lobbyist is kind of like Pinocchio, wasn't a real boy, but
he kind of snuck into the background and said, all right, I guess I'll see myself out.
But that's why.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, right? I mean, obviously, like I said earlier, money talks. The money obviously is going to get you access to, getting in the door to make your point, whatever it may be. But on the other hand, if there were thousands of truck drivers out there calling their lawmakers about speed limiters, for instance, just for one example there, they're going to get word that we're getting phone call after phone call or email after email about this one issue. That is going to make them take notice of that. Getting people around to do that, though, is a little bit harder, obviously. But I think the underlying point here is that it does make a difference. And as you said there, they want to hear from you because they don't know. There are so many bills out there that there's no way they could track all of them. But if you reach out and tell them, hey, this speed limiter thing is going to be a cluster, you know what, and this is why, that's going to hold some real weight there.
Yeah, because here's the deal. When you call when you call, you should always try to ask for who handles transportation in their office. You may get that person, you may not. But that's who you want to try to get a relationship with. But when you call, right, you're getting a staffer. You're not getting a lawmaker. Okay, and staffers get hundreds of calls a day.
Right.
If they get one call about an issue or two calls, it goes in this pile. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
If they start getting the same thing over and over and that pile starts growing, they go to their boss and say, hey, we better look into this because if you want to keep your job because votes count and votes matter. And if you want to keep your job, this is something that you better start looking at and thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fightingfortruckers.com is a place to go for really a one-stop shop for doing all of this. And this year is going to be super important because of speed limiters. I think we're going to see a lot of action on that. And again, let your lawmakers know where you stand on this. Louis, always a pleasure. Safe travels in D.C., and I'm sure we'll talk to you afterward.
Hey, thanks for having me, and be safe out there, truckers. Thanks for what you do.
Our thanks to Louis Pugh of OOIDA for his time today, and our thanks to you for listening. And I might add, thanks for all you do to keep America moving. We'll see you next time right here on Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm. I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.